Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Fulton's Music Reviews. Tonight, we're taking a look at a new album from one of my all-time favorite artists, Steven Wilson, and The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Stories. And to those who have not heard of Steven Wilson, he is, of course, the progressive rock mastermind behind some of the world's most popular names in progressive rock, such as Porcupine Tree, Storm Corrosion, No Man, Blackfield. The list goes on. But this is his third solo record and was released on K-Scope Records, his first solo album coming out in 2008 entitled Insurgentes, and his second solo album Grace for Drowning, a double full-length coming out just in 2011. But this is his first solo album with his new band, the Steven Wilson Band, if you will, which is essentially his touring band for the Grace for Drowning tour, which just got off its last leg just last year. And the band consisting of Nick Beggs on bass and Chapman stick, Marco Miniman on drums and percussion, Adam Holtzman on keyboards and piano, and Theo Travis on woodwinds. Now the only difference compared to the live band as well as this new studio band is the addition of Guthrie Govan of the Aristocrats as well as his solo career on guitar. And if you've never heard of Guthrie Govan before, man, check this guy out. This guy's just a phenomenal jazz player, as well as just an amazing guitar player in general. But either way, this was a record that was inspired by a series of supernatural ghost stories that Steven had created. While he was inspired by reading such works by H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe, he wrote lyrics as well as stories that kind of correspond with one another and are illustrated as well as written out in the deluxe edition of this album. And he wrote some of this music while out on tour with the intentions of the musicians in mind. He wrote basically this entire album for these specific individuals in his touring band. And another thing that's a little bit different about this album is he's also working with an outside engineer, which I believe is one of the first times he's ever done something like this. And who did he get to engineer this album? Alan Parsons. Yes, Alan Parsons, the engineer for Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, also of Alan Parsons Project fame. And you know, Steven Wilson is a very particular individual when it comes to the sound of his music and the sound of his own records. So I know that having Alan Parsons on board was a very big and ambitious step for him to take, and it seems that he would definitely put his trust in the right hands if he was going to do something like this. So how does this album stack up with a live band and a new outside engineer? Let's take a look at some of the pros of The Raven That Refused to Sing. Now, starting off with the first positive about this new album, the first thing that you notice is that this is a very loose, live, and organic sounding record. It's one of the first things you notice right away is how live it sounds, and this actually was recorded live, which was one of the reasons why Steven Wilson wanted an outside engineer in the first place. And although this album is an album that was recorded live, there are still plenty of overdubs, so it does have a live sound, but there are a tasteful amount of overdubs to sort of kind of break up that live energy. But this is a band that has great chemistry, and it's really good that they had toured already because this band really learned how to play very well with one another, especially in the live setting, because this band is very tight. And it really adds a great cohesiveness to the songs. There's a great balance of structure and looseness at the same time. And it really adds to a lot of that natural dynamic energy that's showcased on all of these songs. And it's something that's only really able to be achieved in a live setting, especially when some of the songs start to speed up and slow down and vice versa. Very well done. The next positive that I want to talk about is that a lot of Steven Wilson's musical personality is showcased on this album. Many parts of the songs and the music on this album, they do sound a lot like his past works, whether they be with Porcupine Tree or even his first two solo albums, as well as other past bands. There are many moments on this album that hark back to classic progressive rock bands like King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Genesis, Yes, Jethro Tull. A lot of that isn't exactly too surprising considering he has done recent remixing and remastering work with Robert Fripp of King Crimson, for Emerson, Lake and Palmer, as well as with Ian Anderson for some of the most recent Jethro Tull reissues. So hearing a lot of that stuff isn't exactly too surprising, but just very, very well done. And even the original mellotron that was used on the album, In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson, was used on this, which is just fucking phenomenal to hear. And thankfully enough, the thing still works and it still sounds great. It just still has that In the Court of the Crimson King sound, and it's just really, really great to hear in 2013 with such grand production. Stephen was able to feature his own musical ideas being played by those who have a little bit more of a technical prowess and a technical ability than him, and it really pushed the limits of his own songwriting to new heights and made him become more of a musical director rather than just a songwriter and musician. It probably took a big weight off his shoulders knowing that he didn't have to perform and record, everything on the album when it comes to acoustic guitars, bass, vocals, and all that, even mellotron and keys. But it probably made him feel good knowing that he was able to achieve some of the more technical parts that he heard in his head that he wouldn't have been able to perform otherwise, since he's not kind of the most talented individual when it comes to technical proficiency, in virtuosic playing, but he did find the right guys to do it, and I think he's very, very happy with it in the end because it sounds great. And the last and final positive that I wanted to mention, which I almost kind of gave away earlier in this review, is the engineering and the production is really top-notch. Alan Parsons, would you expect anything less? He really did a fantastic job on this, capturing the live energy as well as just the entire band as a whole. A very true retro-sounding vibe to this album, but in a very modern way. I mean, this is using a lot of vintage techniques and a lot of vintage gear, but the record sounds like it could only have been made now, and I think that was exactly the sound that Stephen wanted on this record. To have a very true 70s progressive rock vibe, but have a very modern sound. Guess that makes sense? That should make sense. Now, although it seems like I might be coming off as a complete and utter Steven Wilson fanboy, that doesn't mean I'm going to be praising this album to the high heavens. So let's take a look at some of the cons that I have about this new album. The first of which is actually a little bit surprising, is that I feel the flow on this album could be just a little bit better. And, all of Steven Wilson's albums seem to have a really great overall structure and an overall sound to them, but most of his albums have an intro that sort of eases you into the album, or at least eases you into the first track on the album. This album just seems to throw you right into the mayhem right from the start. I mean, for an album that was inspired by stories and is sort of part book, in the overall scheme of things, a little bit of an intro or a preface and sort of like something to start the overall theme and mood of the album is probably something to be expected. I mean, I'm really surprised that something like that isn't on this. There was actually a bonus track, or an unused idea rather, that showed up on the demo discs of the deluxe edition set, entitled Clock Song, which was just a very, very simple piano with some great overdubs of his vocals, just a very haunting pulse of a clock, sort of like acting like a metronome in a way, but it was a clock, just keeping a nice little pulse going along, and really added a nice creepy atmosphere. And I really feel like that could have been a great opener to this album, or at least something like that. I mean, Luminol is a great opener overall, but it just needs a little bit more of an intro. That's really all I can say about that, but the rest of the album flows just absolutely wonderfully. And the last thing is just sort of a little nitpicky thing. I mean, I know I just sort of praised the production and engineering on this album, and it's great. It's really, really great, but where's the kick drum? I mean, that is the only problem with this engineering, production, and mix. Is just the kick drum sounds great when it's the only thing going on, or when it's sort of like a drum part being soloed by itself, but it's just really hard to hear when there's a lot of other musical ideas going on, whether it be guitar, bass, vocals, everything at once, a flute solo, saxophone solo. And it's really a shame because Marco is just killing it. It is just kind of hard to hear at times, and perhaps it's intentional, but sometimes it just sounds like a faint heartbeat through his stethoscope. I mean, there are some times where Marco is doing these crazy double bass patterns, and I just wish it was just turned up a little bit more. Perhaps it's intentional. Maybe that's how he wanted it to sound. I mean, hey, what the hell do I know about engineering and production? But I just think, for my personal taste, that should just be a little bit louder. Other than that, it's top notch. It's top notch. So as for my final thoughts and rating on this album, Steven Wilson really outdid himself this time and just continues to grow as a musician and songwriter, which is just so hard for me to believe, because I said the exact same thing to myself after his last album, Grace for Drowning. This is an album full of great songs, great arrangements, and he seems to be doing a lot more with less this time around. His creative scope really just seems to be a little bit more clear and a little bit more refined this time around. It seems that he really knows what he wants to do these days, which is great. And there's just a lot of beauty, emotion, and even some tension wrapped within all of these songs, which is sort of just a Steven Wilson trademark. And each song really has its own sound, identity, and personality. Each song really does seem to tell its own story musically as well as lyrically, and even the illustrations in the deluxe edition are just their own separate art style with each and every story. This album is a great length as well, 6 tracks equaling about 54 some odd minutes, a great mix of long and short tracks, all broken up, and it really doesn't seem too lengthy. It's got a great flow, and at the end of it, you just kind of want to listen to it again. I mean, it really does not seem like a long and daunting experience to listen to. And it's easily his most progressive piece of music to date, this album as a whole. I mean, Grace for Drowning sort of touched upon it a little bit more than Insurgentes did, but this, more so from beginning to end, is just pretty much a classic 70s progressive rock throwback. The classic prog throwbacks on this album are just amazing. I mean, there are just tons of them, and you'll know them when you hear them if you happen to be a big fan of 70s progressive rock. But it just still sounds so fresh. I mean, it's not that any of these ideas are straight up copies. They're definitely big homages and tributes, but man, does he make them work so well in the context of his songs. And it really works well for him. It's just, this is the setting that I feel like he should have always been in, but the rest of his body of work is just phenomenal as well. And I cannot wait to see where his music goes and where progressive rock can go, with Steven being a very, very big musical director. I'm using that word a lot in this, but he seems to be the main head honcho in the whole progressive rock world these days, and I think it's in good hands with him, helping it move along very, very nicely. So overall, I'm going to give the package, this wonderful, wonderful package of this is going to get a 10 out of 10. I mean, as I said before, I absolutely love these art book packages. As for the album as a whole, it's about as close to a 10 as you can get without it being a 10. I mean, I don't give 10s right off the bat anyway, so the closest I can give it, 9.75 out of 10. This is just absolutely phenomenal. So I think, average that out, 99 out of 100 overall grade for The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Stories by Steven Wilson. Definitely pick this up if you're a fan of Steven Wilson and Porcupine Tree, or even just a fan of progressive rock in general. This is just as perfect as progressive rock is going to get here in 2013. For right now, 99 out of 100 for Steven Wilson, The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Stories. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please like and subscribe if you liked what you saw and heard, and I will see you next time with another review. Take care, everyone.